Dr. Eleanor Chatburn is a clinical psychologist at South London, lecturer at the University of East Anglia, just down the road from me, and the ambassador for the British Skin Foundation. Welcome in, and I hope you're well.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to cook like a pumpkin soup and just kind of get cozy because it's just feeling so autumnal and dark. And yeah, I think
Yeah, it really is. It's just like I'm now walking my dog at night, at
Yeah.
like dark, morning and night, and that's depressing. So for anyone that's not, so I know you from social media and all the good work you're doing on there, but for anyone that maybe it's this first time they've come across yourself or your work, do you want to just give obviously I gave some titles there, but maybe an overview of what it is you do and what your work looks like?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So I'm a registered clinical psychologist. So my training is in mental health. So just to clarify, I'm not a doctor. I'm not trained in dermatology. People listening here will know a lot more about psoriasis than I do. But I suppose my expertise is in the psychological impact of living with or of having any kind of health condition, including skin conditions. And I suppose I got interested in this area just from my own personal experience. Now, I don't have psoriasis. I have a family member who lived with psoriasis for many years. That was very poorly controlled. So I saw what that was like for him as a child. But myself, I had severe acne and a body condition called hidradenitis suppurativa. And again, I just saw that there was no psychological support. There was no mental health support, and crucially, even no one even asked. Right? No one at any point asked me, "What's this like for you?" That the focus is always on managing the symptoms, the physical symptoms, isn't it? And yeah, that kind of really shocked me. And I trained as a clinical psychologist, and just thought, you know what, I think there's a huge area of unmet need among people with skin disease. So I've ended up, I'm mainly a researcher, but I have this small private clinic, which it's in central London. It's a consultant dermatologist-led clinic at South London, where we take a sort of multidisciplinary approach. And there's a couple of clinics that do that. I hope it becomes more of a trend. But perhaps people listening, I don't know where they are in the world, but in the UK, in the NHS, we have got a couple of centres now for what we call psychodermatology, where there are mental health professionals or psychiatrists or psychologists who work quite closely with dermatologists. So I would always say to anyone listening, do check out kind of what's in your local area. But unfortunately, there's a bit of a postcode lottery. So it's not, unfortunately, something everyone can access. But yeah, so basically there are a couple of us who are psychologists but have this interest in dermatology, but I would like them to be more of us.
Yes, and that's a really important point you make about them things being out there, because as somebody that went most of their life living with chronic pain, only to discover such a thing as a pain management clinic was 3 miles down the road from where I
Right.
live, and nobody had ever mentioned it, and it totally changed my life, changed the way I thought about managing my condition. And
Yeah.
yeah, I literally could have walked to it on a good day,
We didn't know.
and didn't know it
And
was
that's
there.
just so, isn't that so frustrating that's it. I mean, so I have colleagues who are specialist pain psychologists, and I know how valuable that service is, and what I like about that service is it's truly multidisciplinary. So, you might know yourself, like you might see a psychologist, you might also see a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist. But like you say, if no one's even thought to mention it, because in your GP appointment or dermatology appointment, time is so tight, the question hasn't even been asked, or you haven't even had the chance to know it's an option. And this is why patient advocacy, and I think the work you do is so important, because it's kind of giving people that kind of power and that knowledge, so that in their next healthcare appointment they can say, right, I think this might be my area. What am I eligible for? What can you refer me for?
Yeah, And like I say, that multidisciplinary approach, it completely changed the way I went about my advocacy, because up until that point I was still very much in that mindset of like, keep taking your pills and keep, doing it, and sort of like it being a one-way relationship.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly go to somewhere like a pain management clinic, and it sounds like the spaces you operate in around skin and that is similar, where okay, I've got an OT in the room, I've got a physio in the room, and it isn't just any physio, it's a pain specialist physio, and you've got this psychologist, and all these people are lined up, and they're all in the same place, and it was like, wow, I've now seen the future, and now I've seen that and had that experience. It's really
Yeah.
hard to then go back to the sort of traditional model.
100%.
And
Yeah.
and so in terms of like on go back to like the skin side of things, was it your sort of lived experience? Did that play a part in you going into that sort of line of work?
Very much so, because I'm going to be honest, with the training that all clinical psychologists go through, it's an intense 3 years of doctoral level training. We didn't have a single session on skin conditions. We had something on visible differences, but so it's not something that's kind of a core part of the training. I think if it hadn't been for my personal experience, I wouldn't have been aware just how prevalent mental health problems are among this community, and also how common skin disease is. This isn't, and it's interesting because sometimes I say to colleagues, I do this work for the British Skin Foundation. They're like, "Oh, that's quite niche, isn't it?" I'm like, "Well, no, it's not niche, actually." Do you know how common skin diseases are, as psoriasis is, and how common problems like depression and anxiety are? This isn't niche at all. But yes, I think the fact that I got very depressed with my skin problems throughout my teenage years, and also developed quite acute, basically social anxiety, all because of how self-conscious I felt about my skin that had been untreated. I couldn't see a dermatologist, no one even suggested it. And this was kind of before the days of kind of proper internet access. It was still in kind of dial-up modem world, so didn't even realize that I should have seen a dermatologist. And that kind of struggling on your own, and feeling like you're the only one. And then when you're feeling down, feeling even worse because you're like, why? Maybe I'm not strong enough, maybe I'm weak. And then you get, you know, um, comments like, oh, it's just a few spots. Why are you so bothered? So the kind of stigma that you get, and the misunderstanding by the public, it just kind of really sensitized me to just how this kind of cocktail of the kind of
Yeah.
stigma, especially for looking a little bit different, but also that people don't understand the diversity of skin problems, and it isn't just about having a few spots. That can be, and I know you talk about this yourself, less visible conditions actually that can be the most painful. So I think this has just really got me really fired up about raising awareness.
Yeah. I I think
Ranting
there
on
was a
like this.
there was something I wrote which you shared, which straight away made me think, yes, we're on the same page. It was around that. I think it was something like about not excluding people based on the severity of their skin condition, or
Yes.
because I see it every week in my advocacy. I will have an email drop into my inbox that says, "Oh, we're looking for someone for a focus group or for this project. They need severe to moderate psoriasis," and I'm like, why? And I know
Yeah.
I don't make friends by being like that, but it's just, but why? Because take the example I always give. I've got no hair. I could have one patch of psoriasis here, and that will
Mm,
affect me in terms of confidence and the mental impact as much as somebody that's maybe got half their torso covered, but they've got a
100%.
t-shirt on. So for me, it shouldn't have to be there shouldn't be a qualifier. If it impacts you, it impacts you, but we're not asking people to find out if it does impact them.
No, and I think I remember that post you wrote really vividly, and it just made me think of how difficult it is to do this kind of advocacy and awareness raising work through what is primarily visual media, right?
Yeah,
I'm particularly, I suppose I've concentrated more on Instagram. I kind of hate it, um, because you've got to make, eye-catching, aesthetically pleasing content, or it doesn't get likes. The algorithm doesn't like it. Now, skin conditions aren't particularly aesthetically pleasing. You could argue, and this is a bit, I want to be a bit careful what I say, but some are perhaps arguably a little bit more aesthetic than others.
Mhm.
If you have a skin condition that's actively oozing or weeping or bleeding, that's not pretty. And of course, you shouldn't feel that you have to display that. And I think your post also said, also some of us have skin problems in private areas of the body
Yeah.
that we probably get blocked from Instagram from posting. But this is the challenge, I think, of how do you in this day and age raise awareness about something that can't be nicely represented in an image,
Yeah.
which leads us to this strange situation, like you say, of brands and organizations asking for people with marked visible difference,
Yeah.
which kind of flies in the face of all the research. So all the research into visible differences says that, yes, there is a spectrum of severity. And yes, people with more severe or more noticeable differences can experience more stigma, 100%. However, the psychological distress that people experience is not correlated with the severity of the difference. So, as you said, someone can have one, patch, and they could be more distressed than somebody who's living with considerable difference.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think there's something more anecdotally I've noticed about people who develop problems later in life than those who've perhaps had congenital differences or differences from a very early age and perhaps have come more to a state of acceptance with it. And I think it's something about conditions like psoriasis, but I also work with people with rosacea, where it's very inflammatory. And as you know, it comes and goes, that you can never fully kind of settle into, a way of being with it because, you're always like, well, is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? So there's that element of the uncertainty of the condition, which again, I just think isn't being factored in. And this is why I see so many people who develop problems around anxiety, is it's all about this sort of unpredictable nature of this chronic disease.
Yeah, it's constant. Like, because I describe it of like, grieving yesterday and fearing tomorrow, because it's kind of like you are stuck in
Yeah.
that place. And also as well, I think we feel a lot of pressure with skin conditions for things to be bad when we're being seen. Like, you can guarantee if I get an appointment finally with, it's like
Yeah.
currently in the UK is a 70-week wait list for referral to dermatology. You can guarantee when that date comes around, I'm going to have very little to show, and the pressure that puts on the patient, and
Yeah.
it shouldn't. We shouldn't be fearing things being well controlled for fear that we're then not going to get the support for when it isn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%. And certainly I've heard my colleague who's a consultant dermatologist say the same thing. People come in and they're like, oh, it's typical. This is the best day I've had in in months. So I would say dermatologists are very aware of that, and it doesn't by any, stretch invalidate the difficult experience you've gone from through. And I suppose this is where having smartphones and
Yeah.
documenting your skin actually can be so helpful.
Yeah, really can. And that feels like one area where the whole smartphone and app approach could really work, because like, with the work I do, I see a little bit of what's coming down the line, and it feels like there's going to be 101 apps sort of put on
Ah,
patients. And sort
yeah,
of my question is, does it add to the patient's burden? Because if I'm having to do lots of stuff, is that adding to my burden? And two, there's times like when my arthritis is well controlled, I don't want to think about it. I just want
yeah,
to get on with living. But I think with skin, that's a bit different. I think because for something that is so visible and that it fluid and changes a lot, then that could almost help us identify, triggers and issues, and because there might be certain times of the year it's worse for me, and I maybe haven't twigged that. So yeah, it's an interesting point on the phones.
mm,
Um,
and I like that idea of, kind of self-monitoring. So whether that is an app or a diary or a journal, journals are very popular at the moment, because often, like you say, there's things that are, with our skin completely largely out of our control. Sometimes there was a trigger and you would think, oh, maybe with hindsight I wouldn't, but most of the time it is out of our control. But what we might notice if we kind of, start diarizing things is noticing, are there things that we're doing that are maybe kind of worsening our reaction to the flare up? So, a classic thing, right, when we feel a bit low is that we, and all humans do this, we tend to reduce our activity.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, I can't face seeing my friends tonight. I'm going to cancel those plans. I'm going to stay in. I'm going to eat junk food. I'm going to watch Netflix. Look, no shame. Sometimes you need to do that. But what can happen when we get stuck is that we just do that, right, for days and days. We're not going out. We're not doing the things that bring us joy, give us that social connection. And then we get even further, then we start to go down the depressive downward spiral. So yes, the original trigger might be the flare up, but sometimes we do things or we don't do things that then kind of exacerbate it. So this is when kind of keeping a diary can help just give a little bit of perspective, but also then, like you said, when things are better and understandably like, oh, and I just want to live my life
Yeah.
when things are better. But again, well, what is it you're doing, right? When you're on those good days, again, like documenting what did you do on those good days? Because maybe there's ways you could bring some of that in when your skin is flaring. So it's about also kind of learning, the links between our physical health, but our behaviors, the things we're doing, and then our kind of cognitive, our inner world, and our emotions, and they're all so intricately linked.
Yeah. And as a really good point about that, being aware of what you're doing when things are going well. 'Cause as somebody that's I literally just got discharged from a year of on and off sort of CBT and things like that.
Ah,
I hadn't like appreciated how, like, for example, the stuff I learned from pain management could be applied to managing my skin, which that would have seemed completely foreign to me. But you take like a concept like pacing. I was thinking of that very much about like a physical thing, but I was also doing it almost like mental, emotional thing. So if I was
yeah,
off sick, I was punishing myself and not doing anything. I'd cancel doing this sort of activity. I
yeah,
would stop hanging out with friends. I'd stop playing guitar,
yeah,
and it was almost like, oh, if you're sick or you're not at work, then you can't have any fun. And then it was no wonder that a flare would start as a flare, a genuine flare, but within 2 weeks it turned into sort of a mental health, more low mood
right,
depression thing. And there was just this cycle that I hadn't even observed was really happening. I was completely oblivious to it.
yeah. Do you feel like now you would catch it like earlier before it kind of spirals too far down? You could kind of catch it earlier.
Yeah, 100%. I've never
Yeah.
felt so empowered with that sort of thing. And I
Ah,
can also now tell you the exact things that are going to be my flags. So, for example, I know that if I like message my other half and say, "Oh, should we get takeaway tonight?" There's no like justification for it. It's just I'm looking for something at the end of the day to look forward to. So like if I'm having a bad day at work or whatever, and my mood does that, and my thing will be, "Oh, should we get like takeaway or whatever?" And or I will then start thinking about like, "Oh, I've got band practice in a couple of days. Well, maybe I'm not 100% well. I should rest a little bit." And all these I start seeing the retractions. Does that make sense?
yeah,
And yeah, it's been so empowering because I was just oblivious to it. And now, and another silly one, just in case it applies to anyone else out there, and I know it's not about me, this one, but it's like I would find myself chasing an emotion. So if I was feeling low about myself because of the way my skin I presented or my joints, I would feel numb. That's like a depression thing. And then I'd find myself wanting to watch sad films or tragic
mm,
documentaries or
mm,
something that was going to make me kind of like feel. Does that make, and I had no idea
yeah,
I was doing it. But so if my wife now catch me watching at 11 o'clock at night some like documentary about somebody who clearly didn't have a very happy life or good ending or whatever that might look like,
mm,
that's me sort of almost trying to feel something. And now I recognize it and I don't reach for that program or turn to that. I'll do
yeah.
another activity. Does that make sense?
That's so interesting, and I'm sure you're not the only one who does that. I heard someone mention the other day that they had a depressive playlist of all the
Yeah.
depressing songs that
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
listen to when they feel low, and I think that is look, it does make sense, doesn't it? But like you say, it's a real dangerous path to go down because we know from if anyone's ever done an experiment at a university psychology department, they can just bring people in off the street, and they do what's called a mood induction,
Right.
where they'll start people off who most of the time just kind of, ticking over. They're fine. Their mood is absolutely fine, but they'll play different music, and it will induce a happy mood or a sad mood. So something as simple as the music you choose to play on can, like you say, a very powerful effect. So um, it's sometimes we talk about in depression, opposite action. So we might feel the worst we've ever felt. We might feel like we kind of want to wallow in it and really kind of dig into that feeling, but it's doing the opposite of that. Putting on something that uplifts you, even though you might feel completely disconnected from that,
Yeah.
um, can actually be very, very powerful. And also, I'd really encourage people to think about it. It doesn't just have to be, whether it's music or seeing people. Doing some physical activity. Now, I'm not saying go to the gym or go to a boot camp, but something as straightforward as if you're completely slumped on the sofa and kind of going down that spiral, could you do like 10 star jumps or something? Because what you're doing there is you're kind of getting the blood flow going, you're activating all these positive hormones, and you will get that physiological related mood boost. So there's different ways we can like hack our
Yeah.
emotions, that I think once you've got to figure out what works for you.
Mhm.
And by the way, I'm not saying like never do a kind of Netflix binge, because we come on, you need it
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
definitely.
I think it's about, like you said, um, wising up on your early warning signs, as we call it in therapy, of when is it starting to tip over into a negative downward spiral. And I really like you said, like, bringing in partners, kind of bringing in housemates or whoever's around you, and maybe even like giving them a heads up, like, if you see me do this,
Yeah.
or send that text, or that you then, and you can kind of bring them in on the plan.
Yeah.
We sometimes call it a relapse prevention plan. So especially someone who's kind of doing okay, what we say, well, it's not realistic to expect that you're just going to do okay forever, because shit happens, like shit
Yeah.
happens,
Yeah.
right? It's how you then respond. And this is then you can build on all the wisdom of all the stuff you've dealt with and survived and come through, that you can be like, okay, I know what I did last time. I have an opportunity here to choose to react differently.
Yeah.
So I think you use the word kind of empowering. It's actually, I've got choices in this moment that maybe it felt like before I was powerless.
Yeah, totally. And I think that how important you said there about like communicating to other people. So like that peer support. And I know I'm going to champion that. That's what I do. But like
Yeah.
I've even involved our own community here in that. So like some of the guys in the audience or listening to this or in our Discord server, they will know if I cancel all my streams that week that I'm not good. And I'll now get all these DMs from these wonderful, amazing people that we just met from having these conversations. He'll know, are you okay? And like my wife will be the first to say, do it. You won't want to do it. You don't feel like doing it, but you know
Yes.
you'll be better off for it. Um, and
100%.
and then that communication as well. Where the other night we went to watch a new documentary on Netflix, and I wasn't in any intention looking for something sad, but she was like, "You absolutely don't need to watch that. I've read up; it's not a good ending,"
Right.
and like she sort of protected me from that.
Yeah.
And in the same way they can protect you, like going back to that sort of pacing thing again, from going too much the other way, because
Yes.
like if I have a really good day at work and I don't feel like my health has embarrassed me or showed me up or limited my output, I then run that risk of then going 100 mile an hour. And
Yeah. Oh,
she's very
yeah.
good at reining that in as well.
Have you heard of spoon theory?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure your followers will know all about that. That
Yeah.
yeah, you've got to spend your spoons wisely. And I think, like you're saying there, it can feel sometimes like you want to kind of keep them all to yourself, right? When you're feeling a bit low, but actually sometimes using them up on something like doing a stream or something that's really meaningful to you is actually a really wise investment. And then maybe it does mean you have to stay in bed for a day, or cancel some other things, but you did that thing that really was most meaningful to you and gives you the most joy and satisfaction. And I think we have to live our lives right.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, it's about balance and getting that balance. And I think a lot of it is trial and error, as well. So we have to be kind to ourselves. If we do, use too many spoons and we have a blowout, and that we don't beat ourselves up about that. Because again, that's kind of adding in to, like I was saying about the, the distress and the reactivity. We're kind of adding to that when we start to blame ourselves. Oh, if only, oh, and then sometimes we even react to that by going like, oh, why am I complaining when there's like people starving, and we feel guilty, and we feel angry. And there's a fantastic psychologist called Russ Harris who talks about this idea called the struggle switch,
Right. Okay.
which is an idea from a form of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is like this idea that when a feeling of pain, physical pain, but also like a painful emotion appears, that we kind of react to it. So you'll know this very well with pain. We kind of want to resist it. We kind of want to fight it. We tense, like physically, we often tense around it, but also kind of mentally, we're like, we're really resisting it. And then we're getting all this like guilt and anger and, beating ourselves up about it. And that's the struggle switch that we've switched on. And he talks about, and if people look it up on YouTube, struggle switch, Russ Harris has a really lovely video about it. The skill is trying to learn to switch it off. Now, that's not saying we're turning the pain off or turning off the distress, but we just let that pain or feeling just come up, and we just let it be. And we try and kind of just drop all that other stuff that we do. And what people tend to find is that actually, if they're more just present with that feeling in the moment, that they can learn to be with it. They can manage it. So
And
this
the
is
energy you get back as well, because I
yeah,
found since I was fighting my pain, and it took me, I think it's really important to, because I get a lot of pushback for people that are not maybe ready to hear that you got to learn to live with it, sort of thing. But at the minute I stopped, it took 4 years, but the minute I stopped fighting against my pain and learning to live with it,
yeah.
the energy I got back, like it was you could feel it, you could genuinely feel the energy you got back in
Wow.
not having that fight.
So all that kind of cognitive and emotional, like you said, energy that you'd put into fighting it, you've now got for you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's why I've picked up the bass again and started
Yeah.
doing more with this sort of show format and all
Yeah.
those sort of things, because it was just like I spent so long either worrying about where it came from and what the cause was, who was to blame, what I did wrong, all these sort of things. And that's one of the things where, so I've been doing, I think it's called something like level 3 CBT over the last sort of 6 months, eight
Yes.
months. So rather than focusing on like what's going on in the here and now, it's been more focusing on my values, and even on the bad
Mm,
days doing something that's working towards my values, not a goal. Because I realized everything was about a goal. It was like, right, if I can just get through to say this interview today, then everything will be fine, but it wouldn't be fine. And
yeah.
so now I'm doing the bigger picture stuff. And yeah, since I started that approach and stopped, rather than looking for that blame, but rather than almost like acknowledging it, that's the sort of one thing I've
Yeah.
learned. So I'll get up in the morning, something hurts like mad. Like, yep, thanks for telling me that hurts, but
Yeah.
nothing I can do about it. Let's move on, and
Yeah.
almost like thanking it and move on. And then that
Yes.
really worked for me. But it surprised me. I didn't. If you'd have told me beforehand, I wouldn't have believed you that could have had such an
Yes.
impact.
And I think, goodness, sharing that story, I'm sure people are going to value that perspective so much because, like you say, I think a lot of people are at different places in their journey, and it's really understandable that people are looking for a cure. Um, we all want that magic wand to wave things away, and the kind of cult around medicine is that we want that quick fix pill or treatment, and I think it can be really difficult for people I see, especially those who've kind of developed skin conditions more recently. So I seem to get quite a few patients with rosacea where it's actually quite common to develop rosacea in your 30s. Sometimes it comes on gradually, but what seems to happen is often it'll be because someone perhaps used too much active skincare or they went for a certain treatment. So it seems to come on quite suddenly. And then that can be really hard for people because they've got a new skin condition that they wish they could just undo the thing that they perceive triggered it.
Yeah.
Now, with rosacea, I mean, it's actually quite complex, and maybe it would have developed at some point anyway. But the point is, this idea of kind of coming to some level of acceptance and adjusting to living with something that's now going to be chronic, it can actually take a long time for some people. And this is where we see people, Googling things, buying products online from social media ads, stuff that maybe actually at best is a waste of their money, and at worst could be actively harmful to their health. We're seeing a number of kind of quack practitioners and again wasting the money. And sometimes it's having that quite difficult conversation with your dermatologist or specialist, where they say this is actually going to be chronic, and you might have better days and worse days, but actually this might not completely go away. And I think you're right that that's a really hard moment, I think,
Yeah.
for people. But people who are able to reach that level of acceptance, automatically it just drops that struggle, you know, because you're not putting all that effort into, like, the people I see who are going for all these different treatments, and they're googling stuff and they're holding on to hope, but in a way that's kind of not the best use of their time and their energy, and then they're dropping the other stuff that gives their life joy and meaning, and their life shrinks, and it becomes all about the skin condition. And there's definitely influencer type accounts on Instagram I see with people that seem to be in that place, and it's all about their skin.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is like, I'm sure you can think of accounts as well where they, and then it becomes, again, it's a bit of a cycle.
Yeah. And
That
and
people
then
get stuck in.
and also, like, you get them extremes, I find, as well, where so people are are more for body positive and everything, but it's, if you're like celebrating massively untreated or inflammatory disease, I always worry about the image that gives for people that are sort of newly diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the blockers I had with my mental health and perception of my condition, and I know definitely because I sort of see myself almost as a collector of lived experience stories, the amount of people I speak to, it makes a real difference what people's first interaction with their dermatologist or doctor was. So, for example, someone like
Mm,
myself, I had juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I reported rashes all through my teenage years. They're all sort of dismissed. Then in my 20s, I got covered in psoriasis, 3 different types of psoriasis, and I saw a dermatologist for like 5-10 minutes, and then that was it. And I've never really seen one on one properly since. So that sort of instantly painted that picture all through my childhood, teenage, that the skin bit isn't really important, the arthritis bit is
yeah.
important. And I think there's something we've talked about today on the show already, where anyone that sort of maybe went rheumatology first before dermatology,
Right.
there seems to be this thing there where you almost like programmed where it's not as important. But for me, mentally, I can deal with sore bones a
Yeah.
lot better
Yeah.
than I can a visible, condition, because we
Yeah.
know it's non-communicable, but the public don't, and all the other challenges that come with it. Does that? I don't know if that's something you see in
No,
practice or.
definitely, and it's something we see across a number of chronic health conditions. I was involved in a research paper about severe asthma, and what we did there was a little survey where we asked people with asthma, and then we asked their clinicians, what bothers you most about your asthma? Okay. And then we matched it with the clinician. So we said to the clinician, what do you think bothers this patient most about their asthma? Right. And the results were fascinating, because the clinician said things like, oh, it's the breathlessness, right? They're most bothered by the breathlessness. And the patients, what they said was, yeah, actually, I mean, the breathlessness, yeah, not great. However, what bothers me most was, and it was things like the burden of managing my asthma, having to take the medications, having to kind of radically adjust my lifestyle and go to all these appointments, and the psychological impact of asthma. And I see parallels with skin disease, that medicine, the way a lot of our medical clinics are set up, is they ask about, symptomatology, and things they're set up to treat. they don't, like you say, ask about the things that are maybe outside their remit or they feel less confident about or that require a multidisciplinary approach. So this is why, I think it's so important that dermatology colleagues ask that question, what bothers you most? And sometimes actually giving out questionnaires like quality of life measures, where you can actually fill that out and, show someone actually this is impacting, my work life, my social life, my sex life, like all these areas of my life that really matter to me. Um, so, sometimes we have to prompt, I think, our doctors and specialists to, actually, can we talk about this, please? Even if it feels a bit, uncomfortable or embarrassing, it's like, no, no, actually, this is really important to me. And a really good doctor will want to hear that information.
Yeah, understanding what's like, what's the desired outcome for the patient, and what's their sort of like top three things that impact. Because like I get it all
Yeah.
the time where I'll be either told my skin looks clear, or I'll be asked what hurts where. And like
Yeah.
my argument will be like, I can have the smallest patch of inverse psoriasis. For those that don't know, it's something that sort of tends to be in the sort of more private areas, the parts of the oh, sorry, accidentally muted, that aren't that visible. And but I can have one patch, and if it's in the wrong place, you spend your entire day feeling unclean and dirty, and you're not, but because of how that impacts you, then psychologically, you then suddenly you might meet somebody new or go to a meeting and you're worried you smell, and you
Yeah.
don't smell, but it's just that. Do you get what I mean? That's how something so small, like a slight rash in an intimate area or something, could
Yeah.
spiral into this big confidence issue.
Oh, 100%. And I can relate to that with my hydrogenitis, which I'm lucky is quite mild, but still it's the physical discomfort, but also I don't think we talk much about disgust.
No, no.
And disgust is a really primitive human response that's hardwired into it, and it's got evolutionary benefits, right? So you needed to be disgusted by rotten meat or whatever it was, otherwise it would have poisoned us.
Yeah,
um and and this capacity to be disgusted by our own skin and the skin of others, I think it's so kind of primeval that I think we often don't know what to do with that feeling. And it's certainly something I've struggled with. I don't know if this is a helpful tip. I honestly don't think I've ever seen this in a book, but something I've just personally found. You can tell me what you think of this. I've tried to turn disgust into curiosity.
right.
So instead of being like, what's that?
Yeah,
It's like, okay, let's just almost like a doctor would examine it, right? So doctors, maybe on their first day of medical school, they would have had that reaction, that they would have seen so many people with various, ailments and afflictions and things over
yeah,
the years. They're now just professionally curious about it. They look at it dispassionately. They can evaluate it. They can describe it, and then they can hopefully come up with a good treatment. And I'm trying to channel that almost like that doctor mindset, being like, okay, let's actually look at this. And okay, and when you actually like look at it dispassionately, it takes away the kind of feeling that goes with it.
yeah,
Does that make sense? Is
yeah.
that a
No,
weird tip?
yeah, no. It's different. I have, because my one is like almost like desensitizing. Like, 'cause I remember like the first time I got asked to go to a conference to talk. I'd spent so long in a bubble hiding with my psoriasis. Shall I say, I'd always been made to feel like it was secondary. It wasn't important. So I had no issues with my arthritis, but I'd never been around anyone else with psoriasis. And I met somebody that I knew for quite a long while online, and we finally met in person. And he shook my hand, and he had really bad palmar plantar pustulosis, something I get myself. And I remember having to really overcome that. I shook his hand, and my brain done that instant like, oh, what's that? Because I wasn't expecting. I didn't look down. Do you know what I mean? And I was really embarrassed by myself that I had to like overcome
Mm,
that thought. And but what I remember taking away from that is that it gave me that insight about what other people do and how it's autopilot for them.
yeah,
And sometimes we're quick to sort of like defend and snap back. And actually, well, no, like you say, it's quite a primeval thing where we got our or primitive, sorry, where we got our turn off that, overcome that instant thought, haven't we?
yeah. And I think, like you say, even with all your kind of advocacy and all of that, the fact you still felt like that, look, it's a human response, isn't it? So we have to be kind of compassionate to ourselves, that we will notice that feeling, yes, about others, but also about ourselves. Just checking you can still hear me, because something red has
Yeah.
popped up saying
Yeah.
something's gone wrong, but
No,
hopefully
no,
we're
I
okay.
can, yeah, no, I can definitely hear you. After everything we've experienced today, as long as I can hear you, I'm happy to carry
Yeah.
on.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess this is what one of the tips I would have for people is that, because we are our own worst critic, right? The way we talk to ourselves, we would never talk to a loved one, you know. We beat ourselves up, we judge ourselves, like you said, like what have I done to cause this? You know, when our skin is bad, like, you know, I'm a terrible person, I don't deserve this. We talk to ourselves like a worst enemy. And like you say, you would never, if you had a friend in the same situation, you would never say that to them. And this is why I really like compassion practices, whether that is compassionate journaling, compassionate affirmations, whether it is listening to compassion meditations, where we can just remind ourselves, oh, hold on a minute, this is a legitimate moment of suffering and distress or pain. The second stage is to acknowledge that this is actually a shared human experience. I'm not alone in feeling pain, like others have struggled with this. And then the third step is just to offer ourselves some kindness and compassion in that moment. You can,
Yeah.
you know, might feel weird for some people, but some people kind of put their hand on their heart and will just say, like, may I be well? Like, I wish myself well. You know, just offer, and that can be the hardest bit, I notice, for some people. Some people will be like, I can be as kind, and even they might be professional nurses, like, you know, they're professionally compassionate, but you ask them to do that for themselves, and it's really challenging. So yeah, I just invite people to you know, have a look on YouTube. There's lots of really lovely compassion exercises. Yeah, I can see some comments in
Yeah.
the chat popping up as well, which is nice to
Yeah.
see
I
people
and
are open to it.
I was gonna make a point as well. Like, and if you struggle with that, I found a bit of a hack with that. Like, I don't know if it's cheating or not. Like, because there'll be times when I've tried to be, you know, my partner's always saying I'm too hard on myself and worst enemy and all this sort of thing. So what I find is now when I write things for social media, like quotes and stuff like that, I'll write what would I want people I'm advocating for to hear. And sometimes I'm writing them words and I don't quite believe it myself because I won't allow myself to believe it. Does that make sense? So I'm like, you
Mm,
know, so when I say things like there's nothing you did to cause XYZ, but I'll write that because I think if I was someone talking to Joel, what would I want them to
yes.
say? So even though I can't sit there and say it to myself and maybe absorb it, I can benefit by putting it out there in the world to help somebody else. And I think that's why sort of a lot of us advocate on different levels, is that kind of a situation you have no control over. You feel like you've got a little bit back by putting it out there and hoping somebody else benefits.
And this is when that peer support, like you said, is just so important, that when we can't be there for ourselves and be compassionate for ourselves, that we can accept that compassion from others, which, like I said, I think a lot of us are better at accepting that than accepting the compassion from ourselves. So I just think that, you know, this is why I think the community you've built up is so wonderful, especially as, you know, just with the challenges with the NHS at the moment, the support isn't always there for people. Like you say, the appointments are so short, um, you know, and it's so long between appointments, or you might even not be able to access support at all. That kind of peer wisdom and collective support and encouragement, I just think it is invaluable. And I do feel that there's certain communities that there's more of that support than others. I've certainly noticed similar sort of energy in the rosacea community. But there's some of the communities I've seen online, that acne community, I'm not seeing as being such a helpful space. I'm not going to lie, with
Yeah.
some of the content I see online. So I think, you know, all credit to people like you, Joel, who've created this community, and, like we say, spaces that don't necessarily always kind of reward or encourage it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's our community is only good as the people in it. But I think that the main thing is we try to set that framework that allows, you sort of like moths to a light, you attract, what it
Mm,
is that you want to provide. And yeah, peer support's really important to both my partner and I, and especially like widen it beyond the patient. So we talk a lot about caregivers, because like ultimately over the last 4 years, I would have failed if it wasn't for the support of my caregivers and partner and everything.
mm,
So yeah, we're trying to fill that gap, but that's getting very difficult in the current climate to keep trying to do that. I just want to. I'm conscious of time because you've given up so much of your Sunday evening with us today, and come on early as well, so kindly. I just wanted to circle back quickly before I let you go, to something you said right at the start, because I thought it really resonated. So we've had people join us all day on this World Psoriasis Day sort of special event, talking about how, they talked to me about my skin. Nobody asked me about my mental health. Nobody asked me about how I'm feeling, etc. And I think you said something very similar right at the start about your experience. And I guess, have you got any words for people out there about having that conversation? So
mm.
if the way their skin condition makes them feel is a bigger issue for them than the actual skin itself,
Yeah.
yeah, how can they maybe go about having that conversation in such limited time?
You know what? I think the thing, if I could give one message, it was actually something somebody posted in response to a post I made a while ago. They said, if only I'd seen your content a couple of years ago, I would have realized that I wasn't weak for wanting some extra help. And that's really the message I would give to people, that if you're struggling, you're not weak. Okay, it's not because of any flaw or any personal defect. It's because it is objectively stressful and burdensome to live with this kind of skin condition. I see it as a form of adversity. Now, if you're someone who already has, say, other adversities that you're experiencing, then you've got cumulative adversities. Is it any wonder that you're struggling? So I think it's that first step is almost giving yourself permission to ask for help. Now, the next challenge is getting help. And this is the reality of the situation with the NHS as it is. A lot of the public mental health campaigns that you see are ask for help, ask for help. And a lot of patients and service users are like, well, I did that and I didn't get the help. So then the next step is about, right, well, who to have that conversation with and where to go. And this is about, I think, firstly, kind of what's available in your area, but also what kind of help is it that you would like. I am a big fan of, individual therapy, but I also don't believe that everybody needs to be in therapy. And some people, it isn't for them. So you could get the support you want from a peer support group, a charity, a local gardening group, some kind of volunteering, an advice line. It could be that you want to try some medication for your anxiety. There's many different options. If someone is interested in psychological therapy, again, there's different like levels of options, like you mentioned, like different tiers. And again, it all depends which services you're already linked in with, so it gets a bit complicated. But
Yeah.
if you're under the care of a dermatologist, then the first thing to ask them is, do you have any access to psychology provision in this hospital? Because in some centres, like the Royal Free in London, they do have that access. If they don't, then have that conversation, like, who could you refer me to? Now, for people who aren't under a dermatologist or derm nurse, who are under the GP, then it's having a conversation with the GP. But actually, you don't even need to go through the GP in the NHS in England. You can actually self-refer to a service called Talking Therapies, NHS Talking Therapies. You can self-refer, and that's what we call sort of lower intensity therapies. So just for people are aware, it won't be therapy that's about the skin condition, okay? But it will be like a sort of general anxiety or a general depression therapy. which for some people actually might be enough. But for other people, perhaps who are having more, particular difficulties, then they might like to try and find a therapist who specializes in skin conditions. But I'm just very mindful that, not everyone has the resources to go privately for that. Always worth checking with your insurer that if anyone does have insurance through work, then you can find a psychologist who's registered with that insurer. But hopefully that gives people, a sense that there are options out there.
A brilliant answer. And like I say, as somebody who 4 years ago was stuck in that sort of rheumatology corner, being told, take your pills, take your pills, take your pills, and then discovered the world of social prescribe and pain management
Yeah.
therapy, it just opened all these doors. So now I keep sort of shouting from the rooftops about all of these, because I don't think people do know they're available. Like, it'd be lovely if we could get to a world where you could walk to your GP and there was almost like a catalogue of what what is available to you, but we're not there. But yeah, just keep asking. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was a brilliant way to end. And I say, after a day spent with mental health coming up a lot, things like shared decision making coming up an awful lot, I think our conversation felt like a really good way to cap that off. And yeah, I appreciate you giving up your time on a Sunday, a long Sunday as well, after the clocks went back.
Well, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you do, Joel, for the community. I know I've been following you for a little while as well, and I just think it really stands out as, someone who's doing it for all the right reasons, which can't be said for everyone.
Yeah, no,
Online.
and I know I'm on the receiving end of some of that as well, so I know not everybody's in that same place. But yeah, I thank you. That means more than you know. And like I say, I do all of this a little bit selfishly because it helps me cope as well. But I think I'm so far down this rabbit hole.
Selfish
Yeah,
at all.
I'm so far down this rabbit hole now. I couldn't stop if I tried. Like I say, the community we've got here and seeing the conversations we had today, and the way they've supported me when we had some technical issues earlier as well, it pays tenfold in return. So I do it happily.
Sure.
But to have somebody notice means an awful lot. Thank you so much. Thank you ever so much for joining us, Eleanor. I really appreciate it, and I know our community do too. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.